Everyone keeps talking about electric futures and silent performance bikes, but here's what surprised me. People are suddenly excited about the idea of a Honda NSR500 V3 revival in 2026, a raw, two-stroke racing legend being imagined in a modern era that's obsessed with electronics and emissions rules. That contrast alone got me thinking. I started comparing what riders actually miss about older race bikes, and honestly, it isn't just speed. What people miss is unpredictability. The NSR500 V3 was wild, demanding, and sometimes terrifying. You had to respect it every second. Modern superbikes are insanely fast, but they're also safe, calculated, and almost too perfect. I noticed that many riders secretly want something that feels alive again. One big misconception people have is thinking nostalgia means bringing back the exact same formula. That wouldn't work. A pure two-stroke GP monster today would be unrideable on public roads and impossible to certify. Most people miss that reviving the spirit matters more than copying the specs. Honda wouldn't remake history, they'd reinterpret it. A practical takeaway here? If Honda really explores this idea, expect a lightweight, aggressive sport bike focused on feel, not just horsepower numbers. Less about top speed, more about how connected the rider feels to the machine. And honestly, that's what modern sport riding needs. What really caught my attention is how racing heritage suddenly matters again. Ducati leans hard into MotoGP tech. Yamaha constantly references its racing DNA. But Honda, strangely, has been quiet in the supersport excitement lately. Imagining an NSR-inspired machine could be their way of reminding everyone who dominated GP racing for decades. And here's where I think people misunderstand Honda. Many riders assume Honda always plays it safe, but historically, Honda built some of the craziest bikes ever: oval pistons, screaming V4s, two-stroke monsters. The safe image is recent. The NSR name represents their experimental, fearless side. Practical insight? If something like an NSR500 V3-inspired bike happens, don't expect comfort or touring features. This would be a weekend thrill machine, something that exists purely to remind riders why they fell in love with speed in the first place. Another thing I keep thinking about is sound. Modern bikes are fast, yes, but emotionally, many sound muted due to regulations. The old NSR scream was unforgettable. Even watching old race footage, you feel goosebumps. Sound is half the experience, and most manufacturers struggle with this today. But people assume sound must disappear with modern rules. Not necessarily. Clever exhaust tuning and engine configuration can still create character. What surprised me is how brands are starting to engineer emotional sound again, even within restrictions. Practical takeaway? Riders shopping for future sport bikes should pay attention not only to horsepower figures, but also to engine character. A bike that sounds and feels alive keeps you smiling longer than one that's just fast on paper. Now let's talk about electronics, because this is where opinions split. Some riders hate modern rider aids, saying they remove skill. Others wouldn't ride without them. Personally, I think electronics are great until they start filtering too much of the raw experience. I compared older race machines to current superbikes, and the biggest difference is how much computers now save riders from mistakes. That's good for safety, but it also removes some adrenaline. The charm of an NSR-inspired model would be balancing safety without making it sterile. And here's the mistake most people make. They think removing electronics makes a bike exciting. Not true. Bad handling and unpredictability aren't fun. Precision and responsiveness are. The thrill should come from performance, not from fear of crashing. So, practical advice? If Honda revisits the NSR spirit, the ideal approach would be lightweight chassis engineering combined with subtle electronics, assistance that works quietly in the background instead of dominating the ride. Another angle I don't see many people discussing is design. Retro sport bikes usually lean too heavily on nostalgia and end up looking dated, but Honda has the chance to blend modern aggression with subtle race heritage cues. What surprised me when comparing modern sport bikes is how similar they're starting to look. Sharp headlights, winglets, aggressive fairings, everything blends together. An NSR-inspired design could stand out by being simple and purposeful rather than overloaded with styling tricks. Practical insight here? Riders should look beyond flashy design trends and think about long-term appeal.
Bikes that age well often have cleaner, timeless shapes instead of trying too hard to look futuristic. Another thing I keep questioning is who this bike would actually be for. Beginners? Probably not. Hardcore track riders? Maybe. But I think the real audience is experienced riders who want something emotional rather than practical. Many riders eventually move away from chasing outright speed. They start looking for bikes with personality, machines you ride for fun, not lap records. The NSR legend represents that emotional connection. The practical takeaway is simple. If this bike ever appears, it won't be about replacing your daily motorcycle. It would be the bike you take out when you want to remember why motorcycles matter in the first place. And honestly, when I step back and think about the possibility of a Honda NSR500 V3 reborn for 2026, I don't even care if it becomes a mass production model. Sometimes the idea itself is enough to push manufacturers back towards passion-driven machines. Because at the end of the day, numbers change every year. Technology evolves, speed records get broken, but the bikes we remember decades later are the ones that made us feel something. And if Honda can capture even a small piece of that NSR magic again, I think riders everywhere would be ready for it.